Hello, everyone. While Moscow is running around basically pounding away at civilians, Ukraine continues to deliver precise strikes that hit them where it hurts. No more, no less. So, the latest strikes, this is covered by Ukrinform, was against a strategic fuel hub that supplies Moscow region and major airports. Now, we talked about specifically that area. Not only Moscow is the capital of Russia, but it is also a large cluster of, well, everything you can think of. Research facilities, military development, military schools, airfields, and so on and so forth. Plus, it is home to 4 major airports. Each one of them has sort of its own specialization, but all of them are very big. They all send flights internationally and, of course, all over Russia. Russia, big country. So, we talked about Ukraine's psychological warfare, disrupting the flights by just having some drones buzzing overhead. There was no proof whatsoever whether those drones were armed. They may have been just first-person view drones with cameras gathering surveillance, always a good thing. But having them in the skies above Moscow was sufficient to cancel flights and completely mess up their entire schedule. So now this basically messes up with their ability to fuel their planes. So this is going to be a different type of disruption. And this includes not just passenger planes. This includes military planes as well. So again, hit once, make a big impact. This is a prime example. As predicted, Russia first fabricated the story about Ukraine hitting a civilian facility, a dorm, in the Luhansk region, and then used it not only to strike against Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, but also to use their Oryashnik missiles. And we talked about Oryashnik in the past. 1 person was killed, 20 people were wounded, several residential buildings were damaged across the city. So, there is a list of districts within Kyiv that have been more affected than others. The rescue crews obviously are working. And several things there. First of all, for all of the damage they have done, for all of the terror they have caused, they even managed to fuck this one up. Because there's now information emerging that they were aiming at one of the military airfields in the immediate vicinity of Kyiv. What they ended up hitting was a bunch of garages in the residential area and a market. So they can't even do that properly. That said, we have ballistic missiles being used against civilians. And Zelensky rightfully pointed out that this sets a precedent because this is a signal to other aggressor states that it's okay to use ballistic missiles against civilians. So far, all we're seeing from everywhere else are condemnations. I mean, yes, it is appreciated. Thank you, Canada, for example, for, putting itself on record. I know it's important diplomatically, politically, to put yourself on record, but you'll realize that that doesn't do a damn thing. And here's another thing. So, Oreshnik launch setups have been deployed to Belarus. And I know I said this before, look at the map. It means that it is possible to launch those against NATO members, Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland, in addition to Ukraine. So everybody should be looking at this and thinking about it. Now, Putin boasted that Oreshnik is impossible to intercept because supposedly it travels 10 times the speed of sound. That is not true. That is not true. Oreshnik attacks can be disrupted. Plus, Russians have done such a shitty job, like I said, designing this thing in a hurry that it is not terribly precise, which, of course, is both good and bad. The good news is that it means that if they're aiming at something real important, real big, they're probably going to miss it. The bad news is that the idiots are going to hit something else, as they did in this particular case. And more from the series of useless people just need to shut up. First of all, there is a actor-director, Zvyagintsev, who is in Russia and whose movie came up as a runner-up at the Cannes Film Festival. So he said, millions of people on both sides of the line of contact now dream of only one thing, that the massacres must finally stop. Sweetie, yes, millions of people do, but you are leaving out who is responsible for this. Yes, he does say that Putin is the only one who can do this, but, involving people on both sides is kind of unfair. There's people on one side who are responsible for this, who started this. And it's not just Putin. It's his government. It's everybody who followed his orders. It's the Russian people who jumped up and down all those years ago, back in 2014, yelling, Crimea is ours. It's all of those who posted on Telegram celebrating the death of Ukrainian children and saying that, yes, Ukrainian children need to die because otherwise they will grow up and demand revenge. Both sides are not equally culpable in this case. Just saying. And more uselessness. So all of those strikes against Ukrainian civilians for months on end, not a peep out of UN. Russia fabricates a story about Ukraine hitting a building. And UN is strongly condemning any attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure wherever they occur. Fuck you. Explain to me at this point, somebody, what is the purpose of the UN, especially under the so-called leadership of the so-called Secretary General Guterres? What is the purpose? It doesn't do anything anymore. All it does is express grave concern and condemns things when, frankly, just sit down and shut up. Unless you're planning seriously to walk in there and do something about it, then sit down and shut up. You failed to expel Russia from the Security Council. You failed to propose the introduction of the peacekeeping troops. You are the one who had never given Russia more than a slap on the wrist. So frankly, nobody at this point is interested in what you have to say. UN, as it was intended to be, is dead. More to come.